Welcome to the Albany Unified School District Board of Education regular meeting. We're calling to order at 7:04. And can we please have a roll call?
Trustee Inglis?
Here.
Trustee Khan?
Here.
Trustee Davidson is absent this evening. Vice President Mahoney?
Here.
President Hopwood?
Here.
Superintendent Stone?
Here.
Thanks.
And we will now have the reading of the AUSD mission and vision statement and meeting norms. How did you do the first one?
I'll start. The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student.
Meeting norms. Maintain a focus on what is best for our students. Ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully. Endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration, bless you, without sacrificing one's beliefs in what is best for students. Make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their own points of view, even if one disagrees. And now we will have the Pledge of Allegiance. For those who would like to participate, please stand. Thank you. Now we are moving on to report of action taken in closed session. The board heard a student records challenge and voted to uphold the grade that was awarded by the teacher. There was no further action taken in closed session. Thank you. We are now going to move on to item F, which is approval of the agenda. Would anybody like to move to approve it?
I move to approve the agenda as is.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 So the agenda passes. And we're now going to move on to public comment for matters not on the agenda. If you're here in person to make public comment for a matter not on the agenda, could you please approach the podium? And I'm not seeing anyone. And if anybody in our virtual audience would like to make public comment, please raise your hand. And also seeing none. So we're going to move now to item H, which is approval of the consent calendar. One thing I'm going to mention right now is there is a minor change to make to the H2, which is the Board of Education meeting schedule for next year, 25-26. We previously had scheduled a meeting next June on the, I think it was the 16th originally, and we can't be accommodated here at City Hall on that day, so we're actually going to do it on the 23rd of June for our second June meeting. So that's just the only edit to make. Are there any other questions or comments from the board about the consent calendar? Are there any public comments, either in person or virtually?
I was going to have a comment.
Go for it.
We're going to be approving a lot of dollars on the consent calendar today for, I think it's $2.2 million we're approving on consent. So I'd love to, I know we've done some work to get some of the costs from a special education perspective, get a good handle around that from an efficiency perspective. So I'm going to ask for later maybe do a board study session or something on what the progress we're making there and how we're starting to address that.
That is a great idea, and also given our challenges right now with our budget, as we're seeing, that's really timely. Any other comments or questions? Okay, would like to make a motion.
I move to approve the consent calendar as is.
I second.
With the addendum, of course, of that date change.
Are we approving it?
Yeah.
Are we approving it with the addendum to H2 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
That each what?
I just mentioned the date change for next year's
Yeah.
board meeting schedule.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Do I need to restate that or?
you can. Go for
With the amendment to the updated board meeting schedule.
it. Thank you.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the consent calendar passes unanimously. And so we are now, gosh, pages of consent calendar items here. Moving on to staff reports, and we have the superintendent with her vital signs dashboard presentation.
Good evening, President Hopwood, trustees. Tonight, staff and I are going to be presenting on something that we're calling our vital signs, and I'm excited to share that with you. Dr. Trutain, will you? Great, wonderful. And I might ask staff to just, I think I'll stay here and have you, yeah, perfect, okay. Let's do that. All right. You can go ahead and advance to the next. All right, so tonight we are going to discuss the vital signs, which is a few different things. One, it is going to be a dashboard that will allow anyone in our community to be able to, at a glance, take a look at where we are in terms of our student level data. And it is also going to be our way of progress monitoring the work that we're doing in connection to our overall strategic vision of our district. What I'm excited about is that this offers real-time insight into our students' success and well-being. It will enable us to actually take action mid-year and in other timely intervals throughout the year around our data. It will allow us to track our progress towards our goals and allow us to be in a cycle of continuous improvement across the district. And ultimately, it promotes effective teaching, student growth, and something that I heard loud and clear from our community, and I continue to hear, is transparency. Next slide, please. So if we prioritize students' academic, social, emotional, and overall well-being, and monitor this throughout time by committing to having the equity and excellence through inclusive, high-quality learning in Tier 1 instruction, meaning best first teaching in the classroom. We have a whole child focus with support for wellness and belonging. And we have this system around continuous improvement, and we use data to guide our actions. Then we can ensure that every student is safe, supported, and set up for success. We can help every student to thrive. We can identify what's working and address disparities. We can strengthen outcomes for all of our students, and we can ground all of our efforts in the instructional core with a data-driven mindset, meaning in the classroom. We're grounded in what's happening in the classroom, and we're using data regularly to improve things for kids. This is very much in line with the mission that we read every time at the board meeting, and this is also very much in line with what was shared with me through my 90-day listening campaign, as well as through the multiple surveys that we've done so far this year, that this is really, from a community-wide perspective, what people really want to see us do. Next slide. So data-based decision-making happens at multiple levels. And we're going to talk today about this notion of street data. There's a book that was written that we actually, as a district, are going to be reading. Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan, Dr. Jamila Dugan, wrote this book. And the idea behind it is that we need to look at multiple forms of data and multiple levels of data at different times throughout the school year to make the best decisions for kids. And at school sites, we have different places where this type of data is used. We have our coordination of services team, COST, or instructional leadership team, looking at data regularly to make decisions. ILTs look at data kind of as a school-wide, at a school-wide level, which would be more of a map level, if you think of it that way. And cost teams are looking at more of that street-level view, the data about specific students. And ultimately, this is what is informing what we do at schools. And this is what should inform what we do as a school district. Next slide, please. So why am I bringing this idea of vital signs to our district? Vital signs, for anyone who's ever gone to the doctor, and hopefully everyone goes regularly for your checkups, you know that when you go, the doctor will check for vital signs. They'll look for, is your heart healthy? What's your temperature? Your weight, all of these things. And what they do with that is they can immediately give you some information about what you can do to improve your health, or also to tell you if things are looking good. That's what we need as a district. We need to be able to take our vital signs as regularly as possible to see if we're meeting the needs of our students. And again, this is really about identifying early needs, allocating our resources strategically. And when we talk about resources, we're talking about time, people, and finances. Improving our outcomes for each school site, and again, being able to track progress. So our vital signs are going to be looking at 5 different indicators: academic performance, attendance and engagement, whole child support, perception data, and operational health. Next slide, please. So I've described this a little bit, this idea of street data. Again, I should have given credit to Shane Safir and Dr. Dugan, but again, the idea is that there's different levels of data. What we're used to looking at is really more at a map and satellite level as a district. We, at the end of the year, report out, or at the beginning of the school year, report out on the prior year's CASP scores. We look at LPAC, we look at our graduation rates. All of this is documented on the California school dashboard. And that's great, super important information, but what it is it's a lagging indicator. So it's what happened. It tells us the story of what we did, but it's not giving us information about what we can do right in the moment or where we necessarily want to go. So we need to have more map and street level data as a district to be able to make those good decisions. Teachers do use street level data all the time. They are in their classrooms all the time, every day, exit tickets, checks for understanding, looking at student work. Those are really important pieces of information. Those are what we call leading indicators. They help teachers to be able to make decisions in the moment to do what's right for kids. But as a district, we also need to have a sense. We need to have a view into what's going on in that classroom so that we can look kind of at a triangulated way at our data to make the best decisions. And so again, where we're sort of needing to build our muscle and build some systems is really around looking at all of these levels of data, looking at leading and lagging indicators regularly as a district. So again, this is what we're used to seeing. This is our California dashboard, and this is what a highlight of what it looked like at the beginning of this school year based on last year's performance indicators. And as a district, we look at the academic performance, we look at engagement, again, that's sort of the overall social emotional health of our kids, and conditions and climate. One thing that this dashboard does not measure that we will be measuring is operational health. Again, one of the things I've heard loud and clear over and over again is we want to see more transparency in how are we using our resources? What is going on in terms of our dollars? That we just went through budgeting cycles with school sites, and there's definitely more understanding, I think, at the site level in terms of site leadership and understanding where the dollars are going and why that $1 that we have to spend. I talk about that a lot. We have the dollar. How are we using that dollar towards our priorities? And having a dashboard that helps us understand where we are at any one time with our operational health, with our systems around human resources as well, is going to help us to make really well-informed decisions as we move forward. And sadly, that dollar becomes more like 95 cents, which is what we're seeing starting to happen if we look into the future. So again, just another description, California school dashboard, super important, we need it, and we also need something at our district level to be able to understand where we are. Next slide. All right, so today I have staff here to help with this. And when we do these vital signs presentations in the future, we may just focus on one area and go really deep, or we may do the overall diagnosis, but we want to make sure that tonight, and this will be a bit of a long presentation, we want to kind of take you through all the things we'll be looking at over time. So first we wanted to look at our demographic data. I'll have Michelle Sinclair take us through this.
Hi, go ahead. Okay, first we have enrollment by race and ethnicity at school sites. So on the graph, we're looking at the numbers, on the chart, I should say, and then on the chart on the right, and then the bars. And then on the left, we're looking at the percentage and the numbers. So the numbers are in parentheses, and this is what our schools look like. So we are predominantly, well, it's hard to say for one group, but mostly we have Asian students, and second we have white students, and it goes from there. Slide. And then this is enrollment by student groups. So we're looking at English learners, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and special education students with disabilities or special education students. And this is for all students in AUSD on the left, and then it's broken down by site on the right. Again, numbers are in parentheses, number of students. And then this slide shows us race and ethnicity student groups with our students, what our students look like, and then what our classified staff looks like in the middle, and what our certificated staff looks like as far as race and ethnicity is concerned. So this is a good opportunity to kind of see the proportionality here.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a, what do you call that, a voiceover. So if we're thinking about our goals as we move forward, one thing that was loud and clear in our surveys and in the listening campaign is that we really want to, if you could go back to the other slide, please. We really want to start thinking about how do we ensure that our students and our staff reflect one another, that our students see themselves in our staff. And so this is going to be a really important indicator and a really important part of a future dashboard as we start to look at if this is a goal, how are we measuring it and what are we doing, not just to see it shift, but also how are we encouraging people to come and work in our community? How are we looking at, again, our classified staff who definitely more closely match our student population are those staff members who want to become certificated staff, and how are we building our teaching force through who we have here.
Okay, the next section is on academic performance. We're going to go to FastBridge. These are trimester 3, so this is our most recent, the 2025 here is our most recent data. We just assessed and finished at the end of the year. We're looking here at student groups, and we're looking over 3 years. So you see T3 for 2023, 2024, and 2025. In the box on the left is all students, and then each group is down on the chart below. It's the percent at or above benchmark. And yeah, I'll let you look at it.
I will say that if any questions come up during this presentation, it might be a good idea to ask them just because it's a fairly long presentation.
You have a question? Where do we get the SED data? Is that?
A socioeconomically disadvantaged, and it's based on our free and reduced lunch. And then, yeah, that's the formula that we use.
Can we give that to everybody now, though? So is it, how do we?
No, there's a form that actually families fill out in the beginning of the year, and we still have them fill it out because a lot of our funding is based on that. So those are numbers that we do collect.
I have a question about the EL data. So this is for student groups 2nd to 8th grade. So are we assessing the same students each year? So if we look at that kind of drop-off that we're seeing with the EL data, are Is it an accurate reflection of student achievement, or are we looking at different groups?
We're moving students in and out, right? Because a first grader will now be tested. Last year's first grader will now be tested in this year's data. So, and then same with our eighth graders who move out. But it's more or less the same makeup of students.
Can
I
I?
guess I might just follow up would be, does that accurately reflect achievement district-wide? Or are we looking at specific groups? I mean, how can we interpret that? Is it literally at face value? Or is there something more nuanced that you could explain to us, just so we can sort of get a sense of how to interpret it?
Can I speak to it? Sure. Sorry. No, only because the DLAC meeting, I had the same question like year after year until I went to the DLAC meeting, and what they explained was that, and especially like with Ocean View being a distinguished school, part of us being a distinguished school was because so many of our students tested out of ELD, and so like, or EL, and so when they are testing out, like, you're no longer looking at that group anymore. You're now looking at the folks that like are either, you know, like moving up but aren't at the level that we want them to be. So if you actually look at the number of students that actually like tested out and are meeting where we need them to be, like we had a significant growth. So this number, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is not an accurate reflection of like how many students actually met or exceeded what we needed them to. It's probably a good thing our number is getting smaller.
Well,
Actually, no. Actually, the way I would look at this data is, yes, that is true. So students who are English learners, when they reclassify, we most likely will see them at proficiency, because to be able to reclassify requires different levels. You have to have proficiency, you have to get a 4 on your LPAC, you have to have teacher, you have to have parent. However, this is not telling us that. So what this slide is telling us is that over time, we're actually not having as many of our English learners succeed as we did before. So this is 3 years. So 3 years ago, we had 58% of our English learners who are actually at proficiency, and now 28% of our English learners. So that group might be a different group of kids. You are right about that. But at one point, we had more kids who were at proficiency. We probably had a huge bump of kids who were reclassified that year as a result of that. But it is something for us to pay attention to, because what we see here in this chart is pretty much everyone's pretty flat. A couple different groups are going down. No one's really going up significantly, and that's something we want to pay attention to.
That's my question, which that is a good job of explaining, because is it the dramatic drop-off? Yes. I see less achievement, not more. But is it really authentic data, as in which students are being assessed? So it sounds like it can be the same groups with some variation.
It's a mix, right? Some of the students are repeated year after year. Some have aged out. Some have maybe.
yeah, I think I can say that there are many different students, but they're still classified the same, because we have the English language acquisition status. And so when students move from EL to RFEP, reclassified, they're no longer in this group. It's very discerning to me, this data, because it is such a drastic drop.
Yeah.
And we do have other indicators we look at. We look at ELPI, English Language Performance Index, and that's how quickly our students are moving from English learner to reclassified. And our rates are very high on that. And then once students reclassify and they're considered RFEP, or the reclassified group, their English language arts scores are actually higher than our average. So it's fascinating to me, and I'm not clear exactly if there's been a change in population or more newcomers, or, well, I've looked at more newcomers. It's not really true. It's not more newcomers.
But obviously, that's all true, but obviously that number going down is still not a good thing. And so that's an area, that tells us an area we need to continue to focus on. And the fact that our Black and Hispanic Latino populations aren't performing at the same level in special ed, and our primary students with disabilities and our socioeconomic disadvantage are still significantly below. They're consistent, but they're consistently below where we would like them to be. Continues to be areas of focus for us as a community.
Yeah, and also every student group has pretty much stayed the same except for white students who have increased 4 percentage points. Next slide. Okay, for math, we're not seeing as drastic, the data for our ELs looks very different for math, which, you know, tells you that's common because they're taking the CASP or the FastBridge English Language Arts Assessment when they don't speak the language. So, but this is the same thing for math. So I'll just let you look at that, see if you have any questions. And I will say one thing, math, we do give A math at kinder. And so this is actually kinder through 8th grade. Kinder for 2nd, all the way to 8th. Good there? Okay.
Thank you. So one of the things, and this is why we're doing this, because this conversation that we just had is such an important one, and one of the things that we need to start thinking about is what other indicators can we start to take data on. And we'll be talking about our reading difficulty screener that we're going to be hopefully adopting that will help us to have more information around early literacy indicators. Another possible, and this is possible, it says work in progress, it's a draft. This is something we'll be talking about with teachers and really kind of making some decisions around. But many of our teachers actually do use the systematic instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, and sight words, SIPs, otherwise known as SIPs. And it is also a really great way of looking at our students making growth in terms of those early literacy skills. And we can look at SIPs not just with early literacy, but any student who hasn't mastered proficiency in grade level yet. And so that would be another good thing to look at when we're looking at our English learners, to see what specifically are, aside from English learning, what are some of the literacy indicators that we can be supporting. And so this is something that we could potentially be moving into our vital signs. All right. Attendance and engagement. Deb? Actually, Michelle is going to read. Sorry.
I'll just explain this slide, but it's Deb's area. Okay, so we're looking at chronic absenteeism, and I'm going to say again that chronic absenteeism is when a student is absent for 10% or more of the school year. We can look at that at any time of the school year. We have that data through ARIES, but this is satellite data. This is from last year. So you're seeing the line that's going down, the purple line is the average of all students for this past year, for 2024-25 for this year. Oh yeah, this is current actually. I was thinking it was the dashboard. It's not. It's current. I got it out of ARIES actually. So you're seeing a skip here because you're seeing 2018-19 because I wanted to show pre-pandemic data. Always curious about that, what our attendance was prior to the pandemic. And clearly the year after the pandemic was really a high rate of chronic absenteeism. That was 22, 23 after we came back, which was interesting. So yeah, here we're seeing it. And it's a little bit alarming that some student groups seem to be going down and then came back up a little bit.
So one thing to note about this as well, as we have our conversation around our budget later, I think most people understand that our budget is actually tied to our average daily attendance. And so there's two reasons why this is a very important indicator. One is that we know that students need to come to school to be able to do the learning so that they can progress and be successful. But the other indicator for us in terms of our operational health is that we really actually need to have the highest ADA levels we can have. We want to see chronic absenteeism go down. We also want to see our overall attendance levels go up to definitely over 95%, if not well more than that.
And I'll just add one comment about just sort of the shift pre-pandemic to now. I think all districts saw that shift, right, of, okay, we've kept our kids at home, and this kind of more responsiveness, which I think is actually a good thing to mental health and those sorts of pieces. But then also there's an importance for kids to be at school, and kind of that arc of a lot of school resistance coming out of the pandemic, and parents not knowing how to manage that piece of it. And so that's part of, we've really seen improvement each year since the pandemic. And the other thing I wanted to just add is that the shift in the way the county ed code supports have been in place was that the response to chronic absenteeism in the past was much more punitive, which doesn't mean that people at the school level weren't trying to support and work with families, but that if it got to the SARB level, what our options were like a DA referral, truancy court, you legally have to get your kid to school, get them to school. And there's been a huge move away from that to how do we put more supports in place for families who are struggling to get their students to school. And I think what we had was these couple of years where there was a desire to do that, but there weren't any resources or programs or responses of how to do that other than, hey, at the school level, really work hard with your families, which they do. And so one of the really great things that I've seen being developed, like through Alameda County Office of Ed, and I know a number of other community-based organizations are putting in place in pieces to support our students and families with really concrete case management. I was actually on a Zoom call this morning with a group that's through Alameda County Office of Ed. They have money attached to it. They can provide Lyft, Uber, Clipper cards, they have mental health resources, they have tutoring resources, they have parent education. They will pay students to engage with their resources if they're high school age. They'll have money for families to engage with their resources to try to incentivize. And so I think that's one thing I'm really hoping we're going to really see an impact with this coming year is layering in these additional supports for our students who are chronically absent.
I mean, and not to state the obvious, but like looking at that chart, we see, the same kids that we want to see improvement on from an academic performance perspective are the ones we are having some trouble getting to school. And so as I think about the places where we spend our dollars and focus, this is one of those potential win-wins in terms of dollars for getting them to show up is good for us financially, but more importantly, it's
Right.
It's obviously important from an academic and achievement perspective. So solving that problem is going to be critical for us.
Yes, and that sense of engagement and belonging and how that translates to attendance and academic results, and it's cyclical, right? So, agreed. So one of the things that we started really working and talking about with our site leadership team that we're going to be putting in place for next year, it's in place in certain ways but not articulated, especially not at the elementary sites, which is that I think when students are sent out of class for some form of behavioral issue, I think the attitude has been like, oh, we don't want to make it punitive, we're not going to put in areas, the kids need support, we're going to work with them, but they're out of class. And data is data, right? It gives us information. It's not just information about how is that student doing, it's also information primarily about how we are doing. When are kids getting sent out of class? What's the response? How are we supporting them? All of those pieces. And so one of the things that we're going to be putting in place for next year is having an articulated way in areas that, K-12, we're tracking that information. It's being tracked much more right now at middle and high school, but even with that, not always in the same way, which makes it harder when we start pulling data to compare it. And it also really looking at what data is being put in, like the time of day, where was it happening? Like at the middle school, I know one of the big pushes was being able to look at, like when we run our office referral data, not just suspension data, but office referrals. Oh wow, there's this huge uptick of referrals coming out of the 6th grade hallway right after lunch. we need to put some more supervision there, right? So it's that kind of street data piece of how we can be responsive. So when we do our vital signs next year, what we're really hoping to have is not just suspension data, but also just referral data, and being able to really show and reflect what our responses are from like a social emotional behavioral perspective.
Thank you. All right, so as we move into more whole child data, and again, only a piece of the whole child data is attendance and referral data. Another really important part of it, if you continue, is looking at those places and spaces where students have a sense of belonging. One of the goals of the governor, through the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, is actually to create more support for students, basically from early in the morning till evening time, but not just support, but also something fun to do and something that makes kids want to come to school. So after school programming and summer programming are a big part of that. And as we know, we're really trying to, because we have this money, to be able to support 700 students who qualify. We want to see more students take advantage of that, and we're working to make that happen. So that's just part of the data. Also, again, really, we want to make sure that we're serving the needs of all of our students and specifically our most vulnerable students. So Dr. Biggs is going to talk about that.
Good evening. This is just a snapshot, end of the year, satellite data of our students with disabilities in the district, broken down by eligibility category, and also highlighting the programs that we have within the district, and then also seeing that we do serve a lot of students outside of the district. And we met earlier mid-year to kind of discuss this and really thinking about expanding our continuum of services so that we're not spending so much money and having students outside of the district, but really building out a continuum of support services. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now with our new program coordinator is really collecting some of that street data so that we can make sense and create a map so that we are building out more continuum of support services so students are able to be served within the district, but also really understanding the narrative behind how students got to that place of really needing that higher level of restrictive support, and thinking about how we can do earlier intervention supports, not even in special education, but at the very point of our cost and our SST meetings, of really thinking through holding the student and the whole student and where they're at, and really trying to find ways to get them to be supported in the least restricted environment. So whether that's a referral for special education and going through that process and determining that level of need of how we can support them within school with an IEP, we're really trying to do a better job of looking at our data to think about how we're going to have a map to bring our students back, and also a road to make sure that they're able to stay supported with the rest of the students here in Albany.
All right, so on to perception data. So this year, through the 90-day listening campaign, which included a survey, and then also through the Emerging Strategic Plan survey from May, we were able to get some perception data from staff, families, community, and most importantly, students. And what we realized after looking at this data and reflecting on it is that we actually need some more direct questions to really get clear understanding of the perception that people have of our district. But I'll go ahead and read through some of the data. So again, we had over 1,600 individuals in some way, shape, or form respond to my 90-day listening campaign. And then in May, when this data was pulled, which was last Monday, I believe. No, sorry, last Thursday, 90 people had responded to the Emerging Strategic Plan survey, which in all fairness was sent out in May, and school ended right after that. But what's interesting is some of the data that we got from this in terms of where people, again, want to see us prioritize and do work, and without actually having looked at the actual academic data and other data that we just showed you, many people are saying, more from like a qualitative as opposed to quantitative lens, the same things they want to see us do. So, new slide. This is a little hard to see from far away, but what I did pull a few interesting kind of points from the 90-day survey. And what we see here is that, sorry, I have to look at my own because I can't see it. There we go. Based on different, who different people are, whether they're student, staff, parent, community, they do have some different perceptions around what we need to prioritize in terms of improvement. Definitely you can see from this heat map that parents are interested in academic programs and curriculum, and students are a little less interested in that. Definitely teachers and current teachers who are also current parents are less interested in that. But what we can see is that there's clearly a big push for us to really look at our school facilities and resources. And again, community members, there weren't that many who took this survey, but definitely interest in mental health and student support. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So school facilities is clear, but what is school facilities and resources? What, I don't know if there was more to the question.
I think the from the comments, there's a lot of conversation about focusing on prioritizing how we use our resources, and thinking about just in general, making sure that we're being transparent around the use of resources. All right, next, is that the next slide? Okay, great. So this one, we're looking at what the district's key strengths are, and I think there's definitely some patterns. Most of the adults feel like our dedicated and skilled staff are our great strength. Students really felt like enrichment and sports and clubs were that great strength. So that's, interesting. Community support was definitely high on the list for, again, mostly the adults. And what's interesting to me, the slide before talked about wanting, to strengthen our academic programs, and definitely we're seeing that, there's concerns, I think, a little bit around academic programs being a strength. So something to think about. And next slide, please. Okay. All right. And this one is, if you could change one thing about our district, what would it be? And I think overwhelmingly school facilities and resources is one of those. I will say with students, another part of the resources that they talked about was they want more extracurricular types of activities. They want more opportunities in sports. They talked a lot about AP classes, and you heard that yourselves. And so, yeah, I think that definitely is something that came up. I think thinking about just the cleanliness of the schools, that came up over and over again. But I think also the types of facilities, and I think that that's fresh on people's minds also after the bond passed. So something to consider there. All right, and then
I think my overall observation is that there's often not often. I think it's very interesting in the places where there are disconnect or difference in perception between the adults and the kids, and I think we should be mindful of that as we think about our investments going forward.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next slide. So again, this one is the May survey. And June 1st is when I pulled the data. So 90 respondents at that point. I think now we have probably 95 or 96. And this is just the demographics of who took the survey. And the survey was given out to students as well as staff as well as families, not community members at large. Next slide, please. So again, from the 90-day survey, culled that data, got a little bit clearer on, again, Trustee Inglis, just like what was it that people meant by what was asked, and got a little bit deeper. And this is where people really want to see us prioritize and focus. And I do want to highlight that advanced placement is only a part of the story for kids. They do talk a lot about career and technical education and really understanding what's out there in terms of jobs. And I know that Principal McNally is talking about, thinking about how that looks in terms of really helping kids understand career options. And what supports need to be prioritized. I think this was interesting, actually, just the improving regular instruction in classroom and social emotional supports. Definitely strengthening supports for students with IEPs and 504 plans was big. And then what would be the best strategies, the most effective strategies. So budgeting for equity and student outcomes is a big one. And I think we've started that this year. We definitely are on the road to doing a better job next year and having more and more voice in that process. But really, we need that data to be able to look at as we're making those really hard decisions with that one little dollar that we get. All right. Top priorities. This is what staff said, top priorities. They want to improve retention and workforce diversity, which again, going back to the demographics that we shared at the beginning, that seems like a goal. And improving staff satisfaction through engagement and feedback. So continuing to really get information from staff, how it feels to be an employee here. So as I shared at the beginning, I think what the miss in this is I wasn't actually trying to measure perception. I was trying to get information about what to do. And I realized that we do actually need some really clear perception measurements moving forward. So this is just a sample of what we could be sending out next year, perhaps 3 times a year or 2 times a year, to just like a very simple survey to see how are people feeling, like again, a pulse check on how are things going. And we do have the CHICS survey that goes a little bit deeper that we give to 5th and 8th grade and what other grade? 7th, 5th and 7th and 9th, yeah. But this would be something that we could potentially give to everyone. That could really, I think, give us a real quick and dirty, how are people feeling?
This just occurred to me, so apologies for not thinking of it earlier, but like in retail, we often think about Net Promoter Score. I wonder if we think about what a Net Promoter Score looks like for Albany Unified.
What would be explain what that means.
If you've ever been shopping online and you get that survey, like how likely are you to recommend this service, company, whatever, to a friend?
Yeah.
And you get a score based upon, I think it's a 10-box score, i.e. 1 through 10. I think it's like top 3 minus bottom 2, something like that. I forget exactly, but and that gives you your score. So, Apple has a Net Promoter Score of 75, which is great, or 85, which is great, and other companies have less good scores.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
So
that could be it's
a good idea. Maybe not that specific question, but the idea of what's the simple question you can always ask in any interaction that allows people to give you feedback that helps you to gauge whether or not you're just generally going in the right direction.
Yeah, good. Love it. All right, so moving on to operational health, we have our Chief of Human Resources.
Okay. Good evening. So the next couple of slides, we chose these specific areas because, as you'll see later, these are areas that we want to work on for next year. So the first is the area of evaluations, both for certificated and classified staff. And then it just gives a little sort of the cycle on which staff are evaluated, specifically for like our teachers, counselors, and speech pathologists. And it's separated by temporary and probationary employees who are evaluated annually until they become permanent. And then once they're permanent, it's every 2 years. So you can see there are a lot of evaluations happening. This year we have 140 that are scheduled just in that group out of 232, so more than half. And then I lumped it together for the previous year of how many evaluations were completed that year as well. So I think we do really well in this area. Next slide, please. Our classified staff, it's a little bit, you'll see what I'm getting at. We have 154 classified staff, and classified staff become permanent after 6 months. So they do have to be evaluated at 2 months and 5 months. And then after that, if you're evaluated annually, and if after 3 years, then you can get onto a 3-year cycle. But during COVID, both for certificated and classified, we suspended evaluations for permanent staff. And we've resumed with our certificated, but we haven't resumed with classified, so that's a goal for next year. And then another area that we want to work on are absences. So the 3 types of absences that we focused on were sick leave, personal necessity, and personal necessity compelling. Both what we call PN and PNC, those actually come out of your sick leave bucket. But sick leave, as you can see, that's for when you're actually sick or you have a medical appointment, that sort of thing. But there are other times that you may need to be absent that it's not necessarily for illness. So you can tap into that sick leave balance and use it for these other reasons, okay? And I should mention this is specifically for our certificated staff. And so if you look, we went back to the year before the pandemic, 2018-19, and what our absence rates were there, and which translates into substitute usage, which translates into cost. And you can see how that's grown. So what did it look like last year? And you can see it's not quite double, but it grows by a couple 100,000. And then we've sort of maintained that in terms of sick leave, personal necessity, and personal necessity compelling usage. And so one goal for next year is to try, how can we sort of bring that back down and then in turn save in that area.
Do we know how that compares to other schools? Is that like a trend across
I think
pandemic?
Similar to like the student data, right? We were drilled into our heads during the pandemic that if you don't feel well, or your kid doesn't feel well, keep yourself home, keep your kid home. So some of that personal necessity is people having sick children and they're keeping them home from school, right? So it's a shift in how we think, right? But are there other reasons that folks are being out that are not necessarily, like, do we have increased absences on days before and after a break, for instance? And how do we kind of shift that back to we don't do that, right? We come to work on those days. So just taking a look at those pieces.
I mean, back of envelope, because I just did it right now, so almost literally back of envelope. If it's over $100,000 we're spending on subs, and the difference between 2018 sick leave and 2024 or 25 sick leave. Does that sound right?
Just on sick leave?
I just did sick leave. I
Mm-hmm.
said 400 days, 280 a day.
The 3 of them together, when we did the math, it was like 267,000 more. Mm-hmm.
And I think just kind of going back to this idea of belonging and having a sense of belonging, we also want our staff to have that sense of belonging and feel excited to come to work and feel efficacy. And so that goes back to that perception information, just like, you know, I mean, people need mental health days. Like, let's be real. And we do talk more and more about really taking care of yourself physically and mentally. But what are those other options, and what can we operationalize in our district so that maybe staff, instead of needing to take a day, feel like there's some way for them to get their needs met here at work? All right, fiscal health. We are going to have a whole presentation tonight on our fiscal health, and so I'm just going to quickly go over this slide so I can preserve our chief business official's voice for later. So one thing that we want to really think about when we're thinking about fiscal health, and these are just 3 possible dashboard indicators. We want positive certification, meaning that we are meeting our financial obligations. This is really, really important if we want to ever go out for any kind of parcel tax bonds, et cetera. We want to have a healthy reserve, again, same, strong credit rating. We need that. And I am pushing that we consider a healthy reserve at being at least 10%. We currently are around 7%, and this is something that CBO we will be talking about later today, just in terms of how important that reserve is. And the last is the student-based budget, the budget model where we're allocating school sites their funding, and the decisions are being made most closely to where the students are. So instead of it being the superintendent's purview or executive cabinet's purview for how things are being budgeted at the school level, the schools are really making those decisions within parameters and within our LCAP goals and priorities and our strategic plan priorities. So we started that process this year, and we'll continue to move in that direction. All right, so what would this vital signs dashboard look like? Next slide, please. So again, what we're really looking at is increasing academic performance, increasing attendance and engagement, ensuring that our students are receiving all the supports that help them to have that sense of belonging and care, that there's this favorable perception of our district overall, and that we have high quality operational health, and that we're being transparent in our decision making. So this is where we are right now. This is our current vital signs dashboard based on the data that we looked at tonight. This is obviously a mock-up. It can look a lot prettier than this in the future. But ultimately what you see here is that anything that is green is like, yes, we're making progress, we're going in the right direction towards our current goals. Yellow is we're moving in that direction. We're not there yet, we could do better. Red is we're definitely not there yet. And orange is flat. The gray is we haven't started to measure it yet. And again, this is a dashboard if we think about the goals from the prior slide. Like if this is what we're trying to do, this is where we are. Any questions about the dashboard? No? Yes?
I was just going to say that we're not quite halfway through and we've reached our time, but we had a little bit in hand, so.
Oh boy. Okay, I'll go faster. All right, next slide. So again, vital signs report, some things that we know that we can just say. Some areas of strength we're seeing, and we just looked at the data, so you saw the areas of strength, but just some things to call out. We're definitely making more growth in the area of proficiency for our Asian students, our students of 2 or more races, and our white students. And we have some areas of focus. We really have to look at those persistent disparities in English language, arts, and mathematics for our Black African American students, our students who are Latine, and our students with disabilities, as well as our students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and who are English learners. And also, just in general, it's pretty flat progress, at least based on the data we looked at tonight. That doesn't mean it's flat, it just means it's flat on that measure. And so we want to, again, we need deeper data. Student engagement, again, we're seeing a pattern. Asian, 2 or more race students have returned to pre-pandemic rates, which is wonderful, and we need to continue to see that for all of our students. ELOE attendance is definitely students who are being offered the opportunity that we are able to offer it to everybody, but not everyone is taking us up on it. And again, we want to see that our perception data is really growing, that people are excited to be here and to come to work and to come to school every day. And operational health, we definitely have some goals next year in terms of ensuring that we are evaluating our classified staff as well as our administrators. We want to look at overall sub-usage, but not just sub-usage, also fill rates, and fill rates specifically for our classified staff. We actually do fairly well with our fill rates for certificated staff. We get subs, which is actually huge because many districts do not, but we need to do better with our classified staff. So again, I'm preaching to the choir. This is what we continue to talk about. We need to do this work. Keep moving. Next slide. Oops. And so the focus areas, and again, we're going to have our LCAP hearing in a few minutes, but just to kind of show how the data that we looked at tonight actually is playing out, not only in our updated LCAP, but also in this, what I'm calling an emerging strategic plan, which we're going to be really focusing on in the fall to create. Next slide, please. So these are the kind of the big buckets, the big areas. We are wanting to see growth in all of these areas. Next slide. And all of these things fit together, the strategic plan, the LCAP, and the board governance. They're all important parts of us moving that needle on the data and having that that academic and social emotional health of our students. And so these are the things that are we're going to be talking about in our LCAP. Again, if we do these things, then we believe we're going to be able to meet our goals that we set. Next slide. For academic success, for student wellness and well-being and belonging. Effective systems. Shared decision-making. And we've started some of these things so far. What have we started? We started to do some shifting around in our home office. Next year we'll have a little bit more of a streamlined organizational chart, which I've shared previously. We've started the site-based student-centered budgeting. We are starting not that this wasn't here before, but since I've been here, we've actually launched some committees to elevate voices and improve decision making, specifically in technology and in facilities planning. And we are going to continue to hold more committees next year around instruction and budgeting. We're starting to align leadership teams. Next year we'll have instructional leadership teams, which we already have at school sites, but one of the new things is that those teams will come and meet across school sites every about 6 weeks to learn together and to create more coherence. And we moved towards this idea of an equitable-based student-centered scheduling in elementary so that we have all of our students receiving Tier 2 interventions at the same time in a grade level so that students are not being pulled out of their Tier 1 interventions to get that support. And why did we do it now? Well, this is the time of year where you have to make kind of big decisions for the future because it aligns with your staffing and your budget. And so while I've only been here for just a little over 6 months, the timing that I've been here, and I've said this before, it really was important that these things started to get planned for next school year. Otherwise, we would have to wait quite a while to do some of these things. And as I shared with a group of teachers last week, you know, one of the things about being a superintendent, it's a positive and a negative, is you get to see everything, including what's coming in the future. And so tonight we're going to have a little bit more information in our budget presentation about what's coming in the future, but we have to start planning now for what that future looks like. And so sometimes that means we have to go a little bit faster to get slower, to slow down later. But I feel really confident that some of these changes that we've made are going to help us to move the needle for our students. And next year, we are going to continue to elevate teacher and staff voice in decision making. This is something I've shared that's important to me, and something I've committed to the teachers that I really want to make sure that their voices are heard in our decisions, as well as our students. I'll always say that too. We're going to continue to look at our vision, mission, and this emerging strategic plan. I'm very excited that we're going to be piloting a new K-5 literacy curriculum that helps build strong literacy foundations in the early grades. We're going to continue to focus on strengthening our 6 through 12 instructional coherence. The principals at the middle and the high school are really excited about that work together, and they're going to continue to move that forward. Part of that will be this PK through post-secondary math vision work that I'm also excited to get going, and have more conversations around expanding career pathways and post-secondary readiness planning. Again, huge, huge, huge thing that kids want. They've asked for this, they want it, and we need to figure that out with them, because in some ways we actually don't know what careers we're helping them to plan for. So this is going to be a good inquiry for all of us. And we're going to continue to align our systems and budgets to student needs and improve our student engagement data systems. Thank you. See, I was able to talk fast.
I know we've already had some questions, but does anybody have questions? No one in the...
I mean, I think one last thing I want to think about is, this is great. I love having access to all this data and what have you. I think next thing for us to start to think about, as this data starts to solidify, how do we continue to roll this out at all these different sort of forums? Because as I think about how does the broader community really understand it, you know, I'm thankful to everybody who shows up and listens to us talk on twice a month. But I think we have to look for other opportunities to share some of that data to make sure everyone has a good understanding of what's happening from a district perspective.
I also think one of our board study sessions, I'd be really interested in having a session about the different types of assessments, because we often refer to, you know, FastBridge, et cetera, and just to really pinpoint what the differences are and who we're assessing and when, and just have a kind of schedule like that, just because I think that'll be helpful for the community and for us too. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? And anyone in the public? I'm not seeing anyone. Okay, we are going to move on now to item I, which is, oh no, not item J, sorry, public hearings, which is, the first one is going to be on the 25-26 Local Control Accountability Plan.
Okay, ready to go? Okay, good evening, everyone, trustees, Superintendent Stone. I'm here tonight to hold the public hearing for our LCAP. I'm going to just say that the entire LCAP is available in the board docs. It's hard to make that into a presentation. So I'm going to go over the LCAP structure and show you sort of some examples of how we laid ours out, because there's a lot of options for your LCAP. And also, this is part of a 3-year plan that was developed. We are in year 1 of the 3-year LCAP. So the good news about that is that we're able to report out on 1 year's outcome. Right? So every year, an LCAP is, there's a 3-year developed, and then every year we update that LCAP. And we also update the metrics, which is an important piece to that. So again, it's a 3-year plan, updated annually, provides opportunities for us to tell our story of how, what, and why the programs and services we are selecting, why we're doing that, and how we think they're going to meet the needs of our students who are of the highest need. That's what the LCAP is really about. The LCAP is required to address 8 priority areas, and those are the ones that are listed up there. They're the basic, just like facilities, instructional materials, et cetera. And then there's your state standards, your parental involvement, your pupil achievement. I don't think I need to read all of those, but those have to be covered in the LCAP. So what I'm going to go over right now is first the plan summary, engaging educational partners, goals and actions, measuring and reporting, increased or improved services, which is a really important piece of the LCAP, and then what the action tables are. So for engaging educational partners, in the blue part on at the top of every single one is what the state's asking of us. They're saying to give them a description of how parents, students, teachers, and other educational partners were involved in the plan development. Now, a lot of this Superintendent Stone has gone over in her strategic plan, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of it, but as you know, we have these committees. We bring the LCAP to our certain committees, and if not the actual LCAP, but bringing our strategic plan to those committees. And then we collect feedback. And we also, besides the parent groups, we also have the thought exchange survey, student engagement survey, all the surveys that we just talked about. And then how did that feedback influence the LCAP that we have today? And on the right are just the actions that we are taking that have to do from that direct feedback. Which is, again, a lot of what Superintendent Stone just talked about. Okay, so there are goals and actions, and the 3 goals are, our 3 district goals are around academics, whole language, and parent engagement. So we modified those slightly due to the new strategic plan. Because the LCAP, you're supposed to stay the same. You can make some modifications, and then you have to talk about it. So that's what we did here. But it's the same big ideas. And so those are all the actions that we have around our first goal, which is equitable, inclusive, and rigorous instruction. So teacher recruitment, academic intervention, support for long-term English learners, instructional materials, cycle of continuous improvement, and then the new added one is structured literacy. And so we do have some carryover money from the Learning Recovery Block Grant, Emergency Block Grant, and you are required in the LCAP to write an action for how you're going to use that money. And so we have decided to put that money towards structured literacy, and that's part of our whole plan of adoption, a new screener, et cetera. Okay, slide. So these are goal 2. We only have 2 actions under there, and we kept those the same, and goal 3. So it's the same idea. Within those actions on the LCAP, you see strategies. And so the strategies are the actual we wills. I don't have those up here, but those are clearly defined in the LCAP slide. So the goal analysis is what you do after year 1. We did that for our new LCAP. And you're just reflecting on your year and how your progress towards your goal. And you're talking about that in as far as challenges and successes, as far as budgetary, and then any kind of changes you made and your progress towards that goal. Slide. So this one is measuring and reporting results. So the state has a requirement that you include certain metrics that are tied to the priorities. And you have to identify metrics for specific student groups, including your expected outcomes. So you set a 3-year goal. And you say, here's what our current CASP scores are, here's what we want them to be in 3 years. These are all the metrics that we use. You're probably familiar with all of them. The dashboard is a really big part of this. And then the Cal Schools is that's where we get our Healthy Kids survey, parent survey, et cetera. Slide. This is an example of a metrics, and I won't go too deep into this. All the acronyms are there, but they're defined underneath. So this is a metric that's based on priority 4A, using CASP data. You're always going to see our target groups, and our target groups are determined by, there's the whole student group, all students, and then our target students are our groups of students who are scoring pretty significantly below our average. And so we identify those, and those are always who we're going to represent our data on to track. So year 1 outcome you can see there. And then this is new in the LCAP, the current difference from the baseline. So every year we look at, did we increase or did we decrease? You can see that there. Slide. Okay, so this is a part with increased or improved services. So it's required, we get that big lump sum of money from the local control funding formula, and then we get that supplemental based on our unduplicated count. And unduplicated, for the sake of somebody who might not know, is English learners, free and reduced lunch, foster youth, and homeless youth. And so we get a slice of money that's based on our population of those categories, but in an unduplicated sense. And then we need to show how these actions that we are saying we're doing, how are they increasing or improving services for that group of students? And there's actually a percentage. So we look at the percentage of the LCFF that we receive in supplemental, and our actions have to relate to that percentage. So we report on that every year. We show an identified need, how the actions address that need of those unduplicated students, and then what metric we're using to monitor that, and then the outcome. The last part of the LCAP is the budget area, and there's lots of expenditure tables in the LCAP, which our team over there knows a lot about. But what we're looking at in the expenditure tables is the projected base, the projected supplemental, the proportion of that, the annual update tables, what did we actually spend, what did we project, what did we actually spend, and then contributing actions tables like what were your contributing actions, and did you meet your goal of increase and improving? And then there's a carryover table if there is carryover. And that is it for the LCAP. If you have any questions?
Board have any questions or comments before we open it to the public, open the hearing to the public? No. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open the public hearing on the Local Control Accountability Plan for 2025 to 26. If we have any public comment, please approach the podium. I'm not seeing anyone, and if we have anyone online who would like to comment, please raise your hand. Also not seeing any online, so closing the public hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we have J2, which is our public hearing on the 2025-26 budget. Our CBO, Linda Wu.
Good evening. Make sure this is the right height, sorry. Good evening, board members, superintendent, and executive assistant to the superintendent. I'm here today in this lovely evening to give you an update on what we are proposing for next year's budget. We will take a look actually at where our current year's revised budget is, and also take a look, then tell you how that's actually driving the assumptions for next year's budget. Next slide, please. We like to always come back up here and remind you guys where we are in the year. I know we all feel it, but we are here and very gladly, ready to present the budget to you. Next slide, please. So I like to always start with this because I know many of you have already been prefaced with what a budget is, but this is also outward facing. So I just kind of like to put a friendly reminder out there just to explain what a budget plan is. And it's based off of available information that we have today, right? And a set of assumptions that helps us to figure out how much money we're gonna get versus how much our operating expenses are gonna be. We always start with enrollment. The last time I came up here and presented, we said, we're all here, we show up every day mainly because of our students, right? And that drives everything else. And so once the students are here, then we can make a set of assumptions to determine how much revenue we'll get, and then we'll also figure out, well, how much will it cost to actually provide operations to make sure we're supporting those students. Next slide, please. So why do budgets fluctuate throughout the year? So I kind of wanted to bring this up primarily because I get asked often, why does the budget change throughout the year? You said at the beginning, right? And what about now? I get that all the time. I get that here, I get that at home. So I just want to relate it back to home. 3 primary things that have been on the news quite a bit, which fluctuates, it changes, right, what your budget's going to be. The minute that you adopt a budget, it's not wrong, but it's going to change, right? We know that. The price of eggs, I budgeted $3 a dozen, right? That was foolish because it became $14 a dozen, and my eyes actually look like those eggs. I stopped eating eggs. And then, of course, utility costs, right? Initially, hey, consistently paying $300 a month, even if I leave the lights off during the day now, based off of rate increases, unexpectedly, it's like $600 a month now, right? Original budget changed again. Gas prices. So a little small, but we celebrate the small wins, right? Budgeted for $4.95 a gallon to fill up the tank, and then today's cost, it actually dropped a little bit, $4.75. So if you're running a little on empty right now, it's probably a good day to go fill up your tank. Next slide, please. So what are some of the key assumptions that's actually driving what next year's budget's going to be? We talked about starting off with enrollment. This is not new news. We actually talked about this at the last assumptions update. The current year's CBEDS was 3,694 students. The fiscal year 26, we're making an assumption our enrollment will hit 3,784. And of course, that's going to drive some of the costs, right? The increased enrollment and the number of students that we have are going to subsequently just drive cost. It goes hand in hand. So in terms of revenue for fiscal year 26, we talked about a 2.3% COLA to LCFF. FY27 is approximately 3% that we use, 3.02%, and then FY28 is 3.42%. So, and then if you go into the expenses, we talked about, right now our estimated increase for health and welfare costs is going to be 4%. We don't know for sure right now, so that alone already is indicative that the budget is going to change, right? The other thing I want to point out too is that 2.3% is actually the COLA. The health and welfare alone is going to exceed by 4%, and then plus all the stepping columns and everything else. So a lot of our increased cost is actually growing at a higher rate than what our funding revenue COLA would be. And then, of course, with the switch to TK, we talked a little bit about needing to add a little bit more staff to accommodate that. Next slide, please. There's 2 primary types of funding sources. There's unrestricted revenue, which funds are primarily generated from the attendance, and it's considered the LCFF and maybe some of the local donations that you could spend, but there's really no restrictions to that. But I also want to bring up the restricted revenue piece. Those are funds, grants that we receive, from state, local agencies that actually dictate to you what the purpose of those funds are supposed to be used on. In our home environment, I guess, one of the things that I could talk about is that, yes, we go to our jobs every day, we generate our income, but we also might take that money and start setting aside and designate it for a college fund. And you can't use that for anything else other than to save that for your child's college fund, right? So it's very similar to that, how we actually manage our school finances. Next slide, please. Here's the meat. I'm sorry. That's not a sigh. Let me take that one back. So taking a look at where our revised budget is right now, we're estimating we're going to end the year with a total of $67 million in revenue. And we project that that will slightly increase. We talked a bit about the COLA changing 2.3%, and that equates to about $2 million. So the first row that you see is that LCFF revenue increase. You see some fluctuations in the local funds, and that's primarily because typically the budgeting method and the strategy that you're supposed to use is that until the donations actually come through, or until you get at least a commitment letter or so forth, you really don't budget for those types of expenses until you receive it. And so that's why you'll see a change between the current year's revised budget versus what we're proposing for next year's budget. As we look at some of the fluctuations with expenses, these are pretty standard categories, right? We pay for salaries and benefits. Our people cost is pretty much the largest piece of our expenses. There's some minor changes. We talked about step and column increases, 4% health and welfare, and so forth. So you'll see then, as we shift then out of the people cost, what's left? You have the non-salary costs, which is like materials and supplies. We have contracted services. The things that fall under materials and supplies slightly coming down. Also, our contracted services are coming down. And you might be asking, like, wow, that's a huge shift between the current fiscal year versus next fiscal year. It is a huge shift, but if you take a look at the next slide, which I will take us there in a second, it'll actually start to highlight for you why that's the case. Why are we decreasing our service costs by that? But just kind of like giving you an example of the types of things that fall under service costs, utilities is a big one. Repairs and maintenance, you know, some leases, those types of things. Those types of costs are in there. So I don't want people to take away thinking service costs is that's all we're paying for consultants. That's not it. It's a combination of a lot of buckets. Next slide, please. This breaks it down in a little bit more detail, and I guess us folks in the financial world like to see more detail. And so feel free to, like, you know, have me pause, answer questions if you need me to, if it looks like there's just too many numbers like swirling around. On the left-hand side, you'll see the broken down versions of the current revised budget in unrestricted and restricted buckets, and the same goes for the adopted budget that we're proposing for next year by unrestricted and restricted. And the reason why this is so important is that our attendance is primarily driving most of our operations, which falls under the unrestricted bucket. From the previous slide, I shared that overall revenue is changing from 67 million, and we're budgeting for 68 million for next year. If you take a look at the expenses, because we talked about the huge decrease in the services line item, and so if you look at that, oh, sorry, it's blocking right here. The excess of revenues over expenses, you'll see that in the restricted column, there's a we're overspending basically by $3.3 million, but that's not of current year funds, right? We have the following row actually tells you that the beginning fund balance for this year, which is carry forward funds, leftover funds from restricted grants from the prior year, was carried into this year for use, and you can't hang on to that forever. You're supposed to actually use that up. And so what we're seeing here is that it's actually healthy. We are supposed to use it up, and it's showing that we're using it up. And so what's expected to be left over from the restricted side of the house at the end of this year is $713,000. So I'd say good job to the team for being able to maximize the use of our restricted grants, right? And then so in our adopted budget then, that changes, right? We have to take out some of those expenses that were one-times, that was grant funded, and you'll see that we're planning to end next year, at least from the information that we have today, with a deficit of like $1 million, of which about 400,000 of that is actually from unrestricted funds, things that we can't pay for out of our restricted grants. And so you'll see then in that second to last row, you'll see that our beginning fund balance was about collectively, then we're projecting we'll end next year at approximately $7 million, but because of $1 million deficit, we'll actually spend some of that down, and that's primarily from unrestricted funds. And so our projected ending fund balance will be a little less than $6 million by the end of next fiscal year is what we're seeing. Next slide, please. also have the handouts for you guys. So let me grab that. Oh, you got them? Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
thank
Oh,
you.
Thank
We
you.
can follow along. Wow.
Oh my gosh. I didn't like that ending fund balance comment.
Does not like deficit spending.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, if you have your paper handouts, we could continue.
Yeah.
And then hopefully it'll come back online and we could put the visual out there. Fun times. Okay. Slide 9. We are on slide 9, yes. Let's talk a bit. That's me. The reserve analysis. So we talked a bit about spending down our fund balance, right, for what we're projecting for next year's budget. So the minimum reserve requirement is 3% of total expenditures, and that's total expenses of unrestricted and restricted funds. The amount of money that can make up for that can't come from your restricted funds balance, unfortunately. It has to come from what's left over in the unrestricted column. So since that's the case, we've set aside about $2 million. Basically, we're adopting the budget with the minimum reserve of $2 million. And then if you take a look, at some of the board packet, we're actually recommending to set aside an additional 1% to try to get us back to that 10% that Sarah was mentioning earlier. There's nothing wrong with actually putting us on track to save for a rainy day fund. And that's primarily, as you see, that if we end the current year, we're projecting to end the current year in our unrestricted funds by like 500,000 almost, and then next year we're projecting another 400,000. You could see easily that could start dwindling away pretty quickly if we don't start reevaluating our business model, right, for running a school operations. Thank you. All right. Okay, more positive news, right? So it's better it's not glitchy now. So if we take a look then, we decrease the reserve, like basically from 6.3 million in the current year, which is approximately 8.8% left over, to 5.9 million, which is 8.4. So you can see just from that alone, without doing anything else, we are not on track to actually build up to that 10% reserve that we're recommending. I highlighted some of the excess of revenues over expenses. We talked about this in the previous slide as well, but this is really just kind of like analyzing the ending fund balance in general. So you can see that the ending fund balance is supposed to end the current year at 7 million, next year's 5.9. You can see the components of where we've set that aside, actually on the right-hand column. So you'll see, I mentioned the minimum 3%. If we add another 1%, that gets us just a little bit over $2.7 million. You might have $3 million left over, and we may say, great, let's just start spending it. And that's still not recommended, because as I mentioned above, even with all that said and done, with the designations and so forth, we're still anticipating we'll end with a lower reserve than we're ending in the current year, which is 8.4%. Next slide, please. If it doesn't start flashing. Flip the old-fashioned paper first. The old-fashioned paper shows it was just a graphic anyway. But we are now heading in, now that we've talked a lot about what we're adopting the next year's budget will be, what's the outlook? What do we see in the subsequent years, for our operations, knowing that we're basically deficit spending for 2 years in a row? So some of the assumptions we highlighted earlier, but it has some of the subsequent years as well. The enrollment you'll see is actually planned relatively flat. You got a couple of give and takes here and there, but it's relatively flat. If you take a look at the revenue COLAs, it's still not expected to be any higher. The expenses are still going to continue to grow, the step and column. All of those standard assumptions that we said the current year will be increasing for next year's budget will keep increasing every subsequent year. It doesn't stop. Let's flip your pages to page 12. So if you take the multi-year projection summary, you could see that, you can see that total revenues in FY27, so we're adopting at 68 million approximately. We're estimating with the recommended COLAs that they gave us, 3.02 in FY27, 3.42 in FY28. We will grow to almost 70 million in FY27 and 71 million in FY28. If you take a look also then at it goes hand in hand, right? All the expenses also start to grow at the same time. If you take a look at the growth of expenditures, you're also going to increase that as well. And so with that said, FY27 alone, which is just the next neighboring year, right, after our adopted year, is still planning to a deficit spend by approximately $90,000, further decreasing the ending fund balance by FY27. And then in FY28, if the COLAs come through, right, and that's a big if the COLAs come through and our enrollment also climbs just modestly to 3,800 steadily, you could potentially finish off the year, if we don't increase anything else in terms of our costs and our operations, right, positive 300K. So we could make up for that 3 fiscal years down the road, right, if nothing changes. But one of the things that we want to say here is that the only reason why your multi-year actually looks like it's not really deficit spending significantly is because we made some underlying assumptions that we would decrease some of the classified staff. No decisions have been made, what that would be, but that would be partially some of the harder decisions that we would have to make in order to actually balance. So this tries to take that into consideration, but there's no specifics. Oh, it turned back on, yes. I am on slide 13, please. So what are the next steps? Well, there's a lot of unknowns right now. We've said before that basically with the governor's budget adopting after we adopt, it's hard to tell what might change. So what one of the things that we are monitoring too is because I've gotten asked this question before, is that what is a 1% difference in our attendance? What if we actually built it up by another 1%? And that ranges, of course, you get different rates, but this is on a high-level average. Depending on the grade levels, you would get a different rate per ADA. But on the super high-level, 30,000-foot level, a 1% increase, decrease could be plus and minus 400,000 to 500,000. That's another strategy on how we could try to get by during the leaner years, right? So we don't anticipate a zero COLA in the subsequent years. But if we actually did that, that would actually bring down your COLA, that would actually bring down your reserve. And I think it actually cut off the printout what that amount was supposed to be. But ultimately, you would shrink closer to like a 6% reserve in FY27. And then in the subsequent year, if we also have another zero COLA year again, which has happened in bad years, right? And during bad economic times that has actually happened, you would fall just shy of that 3% minimum reserve. Would be at 2.8%. So with that said, I'm looking forward to actually bringing a revised budget to you in October. And the reason why I say that that would be better and more accurate is because the governor would have actually adopted his own budget, right, and tell us for sure what he's planning to commit to, for the year. We would actually have the students in the seats and in the classrooms in the fall, so that would give us a better perspective then on what our real operations should look like. Next slide is question mark, unless that glitches out too. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and we appreciate all the work you've done. I think you've been busy scrubbing left and right, trying to find funds, so all that work is appreciated. Thank you. We'll have public comment in the public hearing in a minute, but does anybody on the board have questions or comments about the budget?
Yes.
So the 1.1 million that is not accounted for right now from local, and I'm assuming that's just organizational donations based on the footnote?
Yes.
Is it typical not to include that at this point? I haven't seen a budget typically right now at this point in the cycle.
That's a conservative practice.
Okay.
We actually do that not just for local funds, but typically if we're just like the discretionary block grant that the governor is saying, like, yeah, I think I'm going to give it to you. We don't know for sure, so we didn't include that in next year's budget yet.
Okay. Is there any reason to think we wouldn't get it?
I haven't gotten any indications that we wouldn't get it. No, we're just hoping that they will solidify the actual amount soon.
Okay. And my second question is, I know that we added, or I understand that we added teachers because our enrollment went up.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry? NTK. So do we have enough capacity to take transfers? Because we've added teachers, does that mean every classroom is full? Right, because you can't, it's not exact. You have, in every grade level, there's different student, like class sizes, et cetera. So maybe that's more of a question for you.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the class and the grade level. We don't want to build a budget around assuming that we are going to take students who transfer in for a number of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that currently other districts are actually not releasing students for transfer. So again, we want to be very conservative and thoughtful and really look at what our enrollment projections are based on prior years and based on analysis. But yes, that is a possibility.
Thank you for pulling this together. I also appreciate doing the sensitivity analysis around the zero COLA. I've expressed before that I'm not as bullish as the dartboard is in terms of what the COLA will be going forward. So I feel heard at the very least. A couple observations I would just kind of make. I see in the next year's budget, we're looking at basically a 1.7% increase in revenue. We're increasing comp, which is obviously not on an individual level, but across the board at over 4%. I look at the percent of our the other broad observation I would make is we're spending about 87% of our revenue on people, which is a significant increase. I think we were at 83, 84 the year before, which is great. I love putting people close, put those dollars closer to the classroom as much as possible. I will say we've consistently heard at board meetings from students and even today from a community perspective around the opportunities perhaps we have in terms of facilities and supplies and materials and what have you. And this is a budget that we should just be eyes wide open with, that is not going to remedy that, and realize that we've got some bond money to deal with some of those things, but some of the things are going to get further exacerbated by this budget, which is focused primarily on people, which again, I'm not disagreeing with, but I also want to be transparent with as we think about going forward and what I expect to hear at meetings like this going forward.
Any further board comments or questions? Okay, I'm going to now open the public hearing. If anybody would like to make comment here, please approach the podium. Or if anyone has a comment to make in our virtual audience, you could raise your hand. And I'm not seeing any. So we're closing the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are now going to move on to our review and action section. And we have the selection of Amplify M-Class I-Bells or D-Bells? Dibbles. The one thing I didn't think of. As new reading difficulty screener for K. It's K to 2. I know, I do too. Funny how it's a sort of literacy reading thing, but okay. And here's Michelle Sinclair again. Thank you.
Yep, here I am again. Okay, good evening. So I am here now to review and recommend for adoption a kindergarten through second grade reading difficulty screener for our district. And I also want to talk about some changes we want to make to screening third through eighth grade. I'll get into that a little bit too. So what I'm going to focus on is ed code, the ed code that's out there, 53008. The screeners that were put forth for adoption that we can consider. The screeners that we are considering for Albany, which is a little bit different. I'll explain why. And then the process we went through for choosing a screener, and then those revisions I was talking about for 3rd through 5th and 6th through 8th, and then a recommendation to the board. So Ed Code 53008 was signed by Governor Newsom in July 2023. They then formed a selection panel committee that was practitioners and researchers, and they reviewed all different screeners, and they came up with a list of 4 that aligned to the science of reading and what they were looking for that complied with reading difficulty screening. And the Ed Code says that we are required to adopt a screener by June 30th this year. And then we have to implement it next year and all the years moving forward. So the screener has to be selected from those offerings. Okay, so some other important pieces of Ed Code is that we are required, the school's required to inform parents when the screening will happen, no later than 15 calendar days before we administer the screener. There are exemptions allowed, just like with state testing. Parents have to request an exemption in writing. Schools must make parent information available within 45 days after the screening. So we have to release the results and then also explain the results to families. Yeah, there we go. The results are not to be used, they're to be used as a red flag, but not to be used as a diagnosis of a disability. They do not diagnose dyslexia in particular. If a student is identified as being at risk, then we must take the next steps. So those next steps are to then use a diagnostic tool to really hone in on what the deficit is there, and then also to offer the student evidence-based literacy instruction focused on those needs that we identify, and then early intervention in the regular general ed classroom and Tier 2 if available, and then further evaluation, which is what I just talked about through the diagnostic, and then we also do progress monitoring so that we can see if what we're doing is improving the outcome. Slide. There's interesting piece of this Ed Code on multilingual learners or English learners. So what they're saying is if the student is a newcomer and does not speak English well enough to take an English test, we must offer them an assessment in their language if possible. So that's a tricky part of this because the 4 screeners available, they do come in Spanish, but not in any other language, and they are trying to develop those. They're talking about developing those. The other piece of this is that they're one-on-one assessments. So even if we were to assess in Spanish, we would need that administrator to speak the language, which is going to be tricky. But they also say that we can use other information to evaluate the risk. So what that other information is or other screening, other instruments. So what that is to come. I think there's going to be a lot of development on this. If a student enrolls for the first time in K2 after the screening window, so we've already screened, we get a new student, we're required to assess that student still within 45 calendar days, unless they bring with them some documentation that they've taken it in their other district. Those are some of the rules. So for Albany, we looked at this and we said, well, there are some things that we really want to hold on to in our district. And one of them is screening 3 times a year, which is what our current practice. And that's really evidence-based, and it helps us to monitor students throughout the year. So we want to keep that. It's important, one of the screeners is only available for first and second and not kinder. So it's important to us that whatever screener we choose will cover all 3 grades. It's important that the data is reportable in an easy-to-use management system, that there's family reports. We have those now. It's important we have training. And then also responsive problem solving. We get a lot of glitches during testing, and we need somebody to be responsive for us, and that's been a problem for us these days. So the next slide is, these are the screeners that were approved. You can see that we eliminated a couple because of those criteria that I just named. The multitudes by UCSF is only, you can only screen 1 time a year with those. And I said, can you do 3 times? And they said no. So also the Stanford one, ROAR, that one is not available in kindergarten. So that we crossed that one off the list too. So the 2 we were considering are Amira and Amplify, this is kind of a mouthful, but it's Amplify M-Class Dibbles. It's Dibbles, which is an old-fashioned test that's been around for ages, used to be paper and pencil. And what Amplify has done is they've taken, it's been changed versions over the years, but they've taken it and put it in an electronic platform. So it's easy to use, easier to use. So we started a selection process, invited K2 teachers to come to a meeting, went over all of this, ed code, and then we had we went over information and the pros and cons of each of those, and then we had some demos from the reps. And so the teachers then were given access to a demo account. They could explore those. One thing I'll say about Amira, well, let me go through this first. And then they also were given a survey so that we could get their feedback because we wanted to know what their preference was. The next slide. When we did the survey, one more slide. So the teachers were given access to all those resources I just talked about. And if they couldn't attend a meeting, we still gave them an opportunity to review the materials. The demos were recorded. They could watch them asynchronously. And so as long as they did all the steps that were on my page of the protocol, then they were allowed to fill out the survey. We only got, out of the 30 K2 teachers, we got 15 who completed the survey. As you can see, a majority wanted Amplify M-Class. And then after consulting with district admin and principals, and we also would prefer Amplify. I'll say one thing about Amira. It is AI-based, and so it was one of those ones where when you're giving a student Amplify Dibbles, you're sitting one-on-one with them, and you're pointing to letters, naming the letters or naming the sounds or what have you. And this is, Amira was all done by a computer. So it was fascinating. You're hearing that little computer voice, and I think a lot of teachers just felt like we're not there. They want to listen to their students read, so I think that was a good choice. So this is what Amplify can do for us. They're a digital platform, yay. It's really user-friendly. It can provide universal screening, just what we need, but it also can do progress monitoring, and that's really important, and it creates these little graphs for as long as you're updating the progress. It's aligned to science of reading, of course. It also has the ability to look at students' results and then suggest targeted instruction. So it has lesson plans and what have you. It's also linked to another platform we use, which is called Amplify Boost. It's a reading intervention program, so it will directly place students into that program. And then it generates student groupings. It has a really good data analysis page. Slide. Okay, so that is the screener that we are recommending. But we looked at this and we thought, well, it's going to be, we're not completely favorable with the idea of K2 using a screener and 3 through 5 using something different. So we decided to question, like, should we use it for K5? So we pulled all the 3rd through 5th grade teachers, offered them this, same process. Did a demo by the platform, and then offered a demo account to work around in, gave them a screener, and then they, not as much of a response there, but the people who did respond overwhelmingly wanted to move to Amplify as well. So for English language arts, we're talking about K through 5 using Amplify. And then another question was, our 6th through 8th grade teachers have been having, they've not been happy about using FastBridge. One of the problems is that it is not well aligned to the state testing, to KASB. And we're seeing quite a bit of a discrepancy, and they are too. And they want something that can guide them more towards that. They also, there's a lot of glitches with FastBridge, honestly, and so they were seeing a lot of repeat questions, like they would see the question in 6th grade and in 7th grade, and it just wasn't a useful tool for them. So I did bring STAR to them. STAR is an assessment platform that Renaissance is the vendor, and then they have STAR and FastBridge. So we thought, well, it'd be easy to switch over to STAR. So we did a session with the STAR people. We opened a demo account, et cetera, and then we pulled the 3rd or 6th through 8th grade teachers, and they, 67 preferred to move to STAR, 67%, and then 28% were fine with either, and then 6% wanted to stay with Fastbridge. We have discussed this and would like to move to STAR for 6th through 8th grade, to at least try it out. So the adoption for the reading difficulty screener, we want to, tonight we are recommending Amplify M-Class Dibbles be approved for adoption for our K-2 state required reading difficulty screener. Next week, I'm going to bring some contracts for STAR and then the whole Amplify contract for your approval. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. And that underscores the need for us to have some kind of session in the future about assessment tools, because
Yeah.
that's so many.
Yeah, I know.
And also, it's kind of interesting why Fastbridge, middle school teachers don't like it, yet it's used at other grades, and we're looking at that data, so I'd love to understand those kind of nuances.
Yeah, elementary's not so happy with it either, but
Yeah, right, okay.
it felt like it was too many changes,
Yeah.
so.
No, that's a good point, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments from the board?
This may be a stupid question. As we think about the data we have historically on Fastbridge, and after the Dibbles and STAR, all these things get rolled out swimmingly next year, as I look to compare 26 to 25, am I going to be starting at square one, or are we going to be like, how do we start to think, how are we thinking about that so that, we just had a presentation about how we're going to track our progress and what have you. Have you had a chance to think about that at all?
Yeah, that is a dilemma, although screeners show risk, and so the risk should not change that much. But then you can say to me, well, you just said that CASP doesn't align to Fastbridge, but it better aligns to STAR, so there might be some differences there. But I think overall, we can look at a risk level for our students, and we can pretty much generalize about that. The other thing that Dibbles is going to be able to do is show us more detailed information, a little bit more like we're talking about map versus satellite versus street. We can look at components of reading, and we can report on that. And I think that's a tool that we're going to be using in cost teams, in ILT, teacher planning, what have you. So I think it overall is a benefit. We still have the Fastbridge data, and we'll have that.
Mine's is more of a comment. I'm actually excited that we're moving to Amplify because we already use that in the classroom anyways, and it's a program that based on your child, if they're getting something right, it adjusts to your child's needs. So when Hashim was in 2nd grade, that was how we were figuring out where's his area of growth in reading, and that was actually one of the years, that was the first year he ever did Amplify, but also the first year we saw a huge increase in reading, just growth in reading, and that was after having already tested out of reading intervention. 2nd grade was the first year he was not in intervention, and it wasn't just him, we saw it a lot of kids in that class, so I'm actually excited that we're moving to a platform that we're already using, and that is already meeting our kids where they're needed, but also I feel like if anything, it's gonna have more data for us to look at if they're already, if it's already being used in the classroom for homework. I don't know if it still is or not, but at that time it was. And so for my family specifically, it was extremely helpful, and other 2nd grade parents at that time. I don't know if things have changed, so I don't wanna,
Yeah, that's a product from Amplify, it's called Boost. And it's a reading intervention program, and that the results from Dibbles, the Dibbles part, will feed straight right into that program. So that's an advantage.
Great. Any more from the board? No? Anybody in the public want to make a comment? And I can't see anybody here wanting to, and I don't see anyone online with a raised hand. So we need to vote on selecting Amplify M-Class Dibbles as the new reading difficulty screener for grades K to 2. Is anybody want to make a motion?
It's fine. I move that we approve the selection of Amplify M-Class Dibbles, not Dibbles, as new reading difficulty screener for grades K to 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that Passes, thank you. And we are now going to move on to approval of the final budget revision for 2024-25. Thank you. Linda Wu again.
Yes, so as we mentioned in the previous presentation, the real big change here to the revised budget this year that I didn't state earlier was actually because our special education revenue had come down. And so therefore it also forced us to also increase our contributions from the general fund to the restricted grants to make up for that.
Thank you. Any more questions from the board for Ms. Wu? Anybody here in public or online? I'm not seeing anyone. We need to approve this final budget revision. Anybody like to make a motion?
I move to approve the final budget revision for 2024-25.
I second.
All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. So that passes. Thank you. We're now going to move on to item L, which is superintendent and board member reports. We'll start with the superintendent.
I do not have a report tonight, as I spent most of the night speaking, so I am going to cede my time.
Great. Trustee Inglis, do you have a report?
Well, this is the first year I've attended graduations that were not my own children, and it was very exciting, and they were really great events, and I was really happy to be there. And otherwise, I'm just wishing everybody a happy summer until next week.
Very similar to Trustee Inglis, got to attend some graduations, which was exciting to see just kind of the growth and everything that our kids have accomplished, and all of the other events related to graduation that were also happening. I forgot the other thing I was going to say, but I did want to really quick give a little shout out to the Albany, gosh, I'm forgetting the exact name of the class, but it was a class run by Miss Miriam Walden, and the students actually put together this recipe and reflections book, which has just a number of recipes that are either within the family or just ones that they enjoy, and it also has like different reflections of just all the things that our kids are thinking about. A lot of them really like struck me, anywhere from, you know, like talking about bikes to like what's going on with our democracy to like music. It was just really thoughtful to see all of the things that, you know, our kids are thinking about and how it's impacting the way that they show up in class, the way that they show up in community. It's an incredible book. I literally read the whole entire thing in like as soon as I got it. So want to give a huge shout out to that. And then also just, you know, there are often ways to support our students in the various programs that they're in. A lot of our high schoolers end up taking like the business class where they develop their own products. And you know, it's a great way to not just learn about the things that our students are thinking of, but also like support their endeavors, because early support, you know, often leads to, you know, our students being able to pursue their passion. That is all.
Great. So I'm going to make a call for members for my favorite committee. I love all my committees. The Citizen Bond Oversight Committee, we've got a few openings. We've got one member who's done a great job of serving for, I think, 4 or 5 years, who's looking to step away. So we're going to need some more members on that. And so I'd call to the community to come out and help with that committee. We meet a handful of times a year, but it's important work in terms of the oversight, particularly of things of the spending on facilities and what have you. So if you have the time, if you have any interest at all, I would encourage you to apply. Given our talk today about budgeting, I'm going to call out that the current state budget agreement withholds $1.3 billion in Prop 98 money from schools. I call this out mainly as an example of the volatility that we need to be prepared for as a district, given the underfunding of schools by Sacramento. And granted, it's probably illegal, but it just highlights the reality that we're going to be living with. It's not just scare tactics. And then lastly, while it's not the last board meeting of the year, For most of us, the school year has come to a close. I realize that many of you are not done. Looking at you, Albany Children's Center and Summer School. But I want to take the opportunity to thank the teachers, administrators, volunteers, community members for their support and work this year in support of all our students. We are all here for the development, education, and emotional care of our kids. And while this often feels like a thankless task, it's critical, and so I wanted to say thank you to everyone.
Great, thank you. Mine is brief. I attended a few graduation and promotion ceremonies last week. The Cornell promotion ceremony was lovely, as was the Albany High School and McGregor graduation last Wednesday. Cold, and we could literally frozen sitting there, but it was wonderful. Such a happy event. And then also I went to the Black student graduation the week before, and I just want to give a shout out to Will Kaysen, Camille Fisher, and Linda Williams, because I want to say, I can see Will there. Terrific Tuesday today. I'm taking a leaf out of his book. But anyway, last week, was it a fabulous Friday, that graduation ceremony. So I really appreciate everything they do to lift those students and support them. It was just a lovely, lovely event. So thank you to them. And again, as Josh said just now, thanks to all of our teachers and everybody who works in the district to support our kids. You're all appreciated. And now we will move on to matters introduced by the board, future agenda items. Does anybody have anything? We've discussed a few this evening.
I mean, mine is I want to do a board study session at some point on special education and cost and some of that, how effective and what strategies we're using to help manage those effectively.
Yeah.
But really, all the good idea, and that came from Trustee Khan.
Exactly. So you talked just now, that was special ed funding you just mentioned, yeah. And then also we just talked about the spending rather, not the funding. The funding's terrible, okay. And then also just, I'd be curious at some point, not urgent, but to talk about the assessment tools that we use. Are there any other future agenda? Nobody? Any more?
Have you ever gotten, because I know at one point we asked about all of our subscriptions to the different programmings that we get, especially for elementary level. I know in the past we had talked about, which ones we want to continue with, which ones we are not using enough. I don't remember if
Are you talking about ed tech? Like online subscriptions? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's part of what we've been doing through our budgeting process, taking a look at it, vetting it, and making some hard decisions, which is part of how we were able to scrub the budget.
Great, perfect. Okay, so I think that is everything, in which case we are now going to adjourn the meeting at...
I believe we have to go to closed
Oh,
session.
no, of course, I'm going to adjourn this open session part of the meeting. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's 9:11, and we are going to re-adjourn to closed session because we had unfinished business. And we will come back here to report out around 10 o'clock. We are just reporting that no action was taken in closed session, and so the meeting is now adjourned at 10:07. Thank you.